This is Situated, a podcast exploring how our surroundings shape us. And I'm your host, Sarah Robinson. It's my great pleasure to talk with Juhani Pallasmaa. Our conversation is taking place in his studio in southern Helsinki, surrounded by his 12,000 books, abundant art and design projects. Juhani hardly needs an introduction. His writings are now classics of architectural theory, though he doesn't consider himself a theorist, and is always very careful to emphasize that the authority of his work originates in his personal experience. The Finnish government just finished cataloging his written works, which amount to 85 books, thousands of essays, and more than 10,000 letters. Juhani has long championed appealing to the full body and all of the senses, celebrating the genius of the human hand. He's long argued that students should not draw with a computer for the first 2 years of their education. For him, there's no substitute for thinking through the process of hand-drawn sketching. Are you still sketching? Are you still drawing? Are you still doing architecture
I have
projects?
a design commission now. I'm renovating the Rovaniemi Art Museum in Lapland, which I designed 40 years ago.
How is it to remodel something that you worked on?
It's somehow a bit odd because you are looking at the drawings as if they were done by somebody else, because 40 years is quite a long distance. But I'm working on this commission with an old assistant of mine, because nowadays everything has to be computerized. I couldn't do it. I just sketch by hand.
Well, at least for me, when I read a book once and then I turn back to it, which is why I love to and can only have books in paper because I want to refer back to them. It's as if the book changed. New things pop off the page that I didn't.
Absolutely.
Is it like that with your going back to something you designed? Do you see it in that completely fresh way?
Yes. Very often when I read my old writings or look at my old drawings, I'm surprised how much thought there is, particularly because at my age of 88, there is a tendency to think that I didn't understand anything when I was young. But I'm so surprised how much understanding there was.
Yeah, it sure seems like there's a lot of knowledge and study and sensitivity. But also you told me once that you didn't really start reading until you were in your 40s.
No, that's right. I read the classics, of course, during my studies, but then there was 20 years that I didn't read much. I started to read more when I was 2 years in Africa, in Ethiopia. I began then to read scientific books, linguistics and anthropology and things like that, simply to find explanation to things and problems that I had in my communication there.
What did you discover?
Well, I discovered that we are different to the degree that we see differently depending on the quality or character of the environment, dominant environments of our youth, early youth. And I learned that there is a window for everything in our mental and sensory development. And if something is not inserted during that open window, then it's too late. And I found it when teaching, when I noticed immediately that my students could not understand perspective. They could not understand the representation of the third dimension on a flat representation on paper. I even gave private drawing lessons to a former army lieutenant because I thought that as an army person he knows about, maps and directions and things and space. No, he could not represent the third dimension in a drawing. Simply because he hadn't learned that in his youth. And the anthropological finding is about the existence of horizon in the environment of youth. The persons who live in forest, thick forests or jungle, who do not experience the horizon, they lose this certain capacity to see depth and represent depth.
Juhani, when you speak about your experience in Ethiopia, it reminds me of a section in Richard Gregory's book, The Eye and the Brain, where he talks about how there are cultural differences in seeing and how it's habituated and also highly contextual. So seeing is very situated. And since we live in the Western world often in rectangular homes and our roads are in straight lines and they fade into the distance, perspective makes sense to us. But to people who live in dense forests, they don't see distance in the same way. The distance cues for them are differences in size. As if, like for us, if we were on a tall building looking down, we would see distance in terms of the size of the people. And so another example that's fascinating was Zulus, who live in round houses and their cosmology is round, art forms are round. They plant their crops not in rows but in circles, and so they don't have the same distance cues or a perspectival world like the one we share. So this lines up pretty similarly with what you're saying, and it really underlines the situated nature of seeing.
Yes.
But it seems like everyone has a spatial autobiography, or you'd call it a place autobiography.
Yes.
And one time in this room, surrounded by books here in your office, we talked about your early experience, and you told me about this experience and image of striped light down in the cellar when you were young, that they were missing floorboards and the light was shining through them.
Yes. Well, in the not only in the sauna but also all the hay barns, because there's a space between the logs, and the hay barn is horizontal strips of light. Yes, that's one of the strongest memories for me in the youth.
Did that manifest in your designs later?
Yes, I like to make horizontal lines, and especially narrow windows, so the horizontal light is ingrained in my mind somehow, or nervous system.
Are there other really rich embodied experiences from your youth and childhood?
Well, tactility of things, because in the country life during the war, which was my growth environment, we didn't have smooth factory-made objects. Most of the things were self-made and rough. And there was wood everywhere. I have written about my grandfather, the wooden table in my grandfather's and grandmother's kitchen. How the thick, huge table centered the home. For me, it was that table which was the force that pulled everything together.
Yeah, this centripetal force.
Yes.
That also speaks to how, the ritual of eating, this biological need we have to eat,
yes.
has all this, it's loaded with cultural and emotional associations. Eating alone is
yes.
so deprived of that, and that's...
Yes. But there are different habits in eating. Now we like to converse while eating.
Yes.
Eating in my grandfather's farmhouse was always silent.
Why is that?
There was something almost holy about eating in the war, at the wartime. I think it was that sense of holiness of the meal that which in that case did not come from religious associations. It was just the importance of eating and food at the time when everything was scarce.
Boy, we've sure lost that nowadays. How has that sense of holiness stayed with you?
Well, in a way, I think, I must say, confess very clearly that I'm not religious in the sense that I would be part of any church, but I have a strong feeling about holiness of life. And I don't see very strong difference between holiness and beauty. Beauty somehow, because it's of its rareness, has an element of holiness in my experience. All the great paintings around the world which I have been looking at, they are holy.
Yes. Well, holy, the root of the word holy is whole. Something whole.
Yes.
Something almost self-sufficient in its
yes.
completeness.
Yes.
And integrity.
Yes.
Which seems very similar to what beauty
yes.
is. This sense of wholeness, and that's enough. It's sufficient sort of
yes.
unto itself.
I have given a few lectures and written a few essays on beauty and ethics.
Yes.
That's beauty and truth are also strongly related.
What is the quote you use? It's the opposite of beauty is not ugliness, but falsity.
Yes, that's the social psychiatrist, what's his name?
Erich Fromm.
Erich
Fromm.
Yes.
Who was originated the term biophilia. Came from
yeah.
Erich Fromm. Which, instead of love of only nature, it's love of life. Which nature is, of course.
Yes.
But we've divided it into this human, natural, all these nature culture sort of oppositions?
I want to add to my reading interest initiated by my stay in Africa. I also read quite a lot of, how would I say, about the unconscious. I read, of course, Freud and Jung. That was very helpful because then I understood that the mind is layered. There is a depth dimension, and I understood that art very much deals with that deep consciousness. And as a teacher, I try to mediate that awareness of the layered mind to my students, because today teaching in architecture is too much information, just information and intellectualization. I believe that I'm an intellectual person in my character, but I have tried to push intellectualization increasingly to the side and look and approach things emotionally or actually existentially.
I think we talked about this writer Jan Gebser, who taught. He was a linguist. He was I guess I wouldn't say he was a theorist, but he was a cultural historian, and he was close friends with Rilke, Picasso, Garcia Lorca, and he developed this theory that the mind developed in these different stages. And the stage that we're in is the mental stage.
In childhood.
Both
life.
in a single child, in a single person's life, but also in
a culture.
As a culture,
yes.
And as a universe. Like everyone on Earth is going through these cultural, these changes, shifts in consciousness, he called it. And so the shift from the mythic way of thinking, animist thinking, sort of atrophied when we went into the mental, which was initiated by perspective, the discovery of perspective. So there's this kind of inherent opposition between mythical consciousness and this mental rational consciousness.
Absolutely. Yes, and I'm trying to myself become more sensitive to the mythical deep consciousness, and also as a teacher I try to mediate that to students.
How do you do that?
I speak about it, but also my student projects, they dealt with often with childhood and a mythical consciousness and otherness. For instance, one of my most successful exercises was to ask students to make a brick, exactly the size of a brick, of some unexpected matter. And the most impressive one was by a girl who made the brick of frozen Baltic herrings. So exercises like that question very powerfully the existence of a distinct truth or reality.
And you told me about another exercise you did when you taught a course with Stephen Hull about drawing, and nobody had pencils.
Yes, or if they had it, it was so hard that it was like drawing with a nail, steel nail. No, it was very powerful to see how quickly the minds of the students shifted. It was silence before with these hard pencils, but with charcoal it was laughter and enjoyment. Yes, the education most of the time in architecture is misguided, too intellectualized, and in my view, the education should primarily in the beginning be focused to the self, the sense of self, because that has to be, your eye has to be adjusted before you can see.
Yes.
And your brain has to be adjusted before you can think. But education normally doesn't understand such things. It's just information, intellectual information.
Yes, and so and another thing which always strikes me is in any architectural setting, whether it's a design task or a competition, the concept is this overarching importance.
Yeah, well,
so there's all this pressure on the concept, but then there's a quote you used by Bachelard which says, between concept and image, there's no possibility of synthesis.
Yes, that's also a number of philosophers, poets say the same thing in different words. This is a big, how would I say, problem in my communication with Stephen Hall, who is very close to me because we have collaborated. He speaks almost always about concepts, and I have tried to say to Stephen that there cannot be concepts in the poetic world.
Well, that goes right back to what we were talking about with these shifts in consciousness that Jan Gebser outlined. That
yes.
In the mythical consciousness, images and myths are the uniting, coherent ways of thinking.
Yes.
And in the mental framework, concepts are.
Yes.
But that's what I think Bachelard is getting at. There's no possibility of synthesis between the two because they're taking place at different levels of consciousness. One is doing one thing and has one sort of purpose.
Yes.
And another has another purpose. And the mythic way of consciousness is full-bodied in a way that concepts cannot be.
As also the poetic consciousness is.
Yes.
Yes. No, this is one of the problems that I have repeatedly touched upon now is the intellectualization of things in education. Also concept belongs to that intellectualization. One of the poets makes the same argument as Bachelard, that there is in the poetic world there is no connection between image and concept. But I think altogether this inability to see the difference or feel the difference between intellectual capacity and emotive capacity is one of the tragedies in the Western world. As Johnson, the philosopher,
Mark Johnson,
yes, he argues that every thought begins with an emotive charge, and I feel that very strongly.
Absolutely. we're finding out more and more. I mean, from an intellectual standpoint, the importance of emotion, which I find really interesting. 4E cognition is now 4EA, so it's embodied, embedded, extended, enacted, and affective.
Yes.
So, yes. But affectivity is the base of life itself.
Yes, yes.
Like Alfred North Whitehead, the philosopher, said that emotion is primary. Emotion is the pulse of life. It's not just a human experience. It's also a part of nature.
Yes, and the common understanding is that emotion is something which only deals with our feelings. We do not understand how primary emotion is, to the degree that it is increasingly suggested that Johnson makes that suggestion too, that emotions were our first kind of thinking. That was the way we processed understanding of situations.
Maybe you know about the work of this neuroscientist named Jacques Panksepp, and he wrote this book, Affective Neuroscience, and he identified 7 emotional systems of animals, vertebrate mammals.
Yes.
And we share all of them, care, grief. Animals experience grief.
Yes.
Care, play.
Yes. Yes.
And so, emotion affectivities, that's why, people use pet therapy, because their animals are so pure.
That's right.
They're such pure receptors and givers of emotion.
Yes. Well, what we are talking now also points out that it is the opening up of the emotional interaction channel that is important in creative education, not to block that with too much information.
Yeah, and I was speaking the other day with Kate Jeffrey, who's an expert in the hippocampus, the place where, it's known for spatial orientation, learning, and memory.
Yes.
And it's organically connected to the amygdala, which is the emotion, which is involved in emotions. And so we were speculating that, our sense of atmosphere, that you walk immediately into a space and you can tell it's an expert sense that we share with other animals. The valence of the place. Is it safe? Is it not safe? How does it make me feel? There's no gap between entering a space, a place, as you would call it, and knowing something very important about that place.
Yes. Well, that's it's easy to understand that we survived through that capacity.
Yes.
Animals survive because they understand the situations immediately. They would be eaten up by other animals if they stopped to think of what the situation is.
Yes, and Jacques Panksepp talks about how birds are as attached to their nests as they are to their mothers.
Yes, exactly. Well, and that's exactly the kind of emotive subtlety that the architects should have. They need to have that kind of animistic understanding of architecture. But again, education goes the opposite way.
Going back to Jan Gebser and his really what I think is a quite generative theory of consciousness, all the older consciousness modes don't go away. They're still alive in us. They're still alive. But we have to access them and keep that spring.
Yes.
That connection between the archaic consciousness and the mythic consciousness and the mental consciousness and the next level, which he calls almost this atmospheric consciousness.
Yes. Well, absolutely. I think that is our, how would I say, original consciousness as early humans must have been atmospheric condition, understanding without thinking what the survival value of a place was. Maybe I have told you that I was once asked to participate in a conversation at the peace negotiation organization established by our former President Ahtisaari, who died a couple of years ago. And I was the only architect invited there. The chairman said in the opening talk that the most successful peace negotiation was in Africa. It was a very, very hot day, and it became unpleasant to be inside. They went out, took the table and chairs under a big tree, which was next to an open sunlit field. And there everything worked out surprisingly well.
No,
well, I could refer to ecopsychological studies, that this was the environment or situation of early humans in Africa.
Yes.
They didn't hunt in the daytime because there was nothing to hunt.
Yes.
They rested underneath big trees in the shadow and watched a wider field to have a sense of control. So that's in deep in our genes.
Yeah, so it's no surprise, when the research comes back and tells us how important our connection to nature is and how it heals us, which you see, Paimio Sanatorium, which we just were at. Mm. And without the surrounding pine trees, it would be, special, but it wouldn't be a healing instrument.
Or fire. It's now suggested that fire was tamed 600,000 years ago. So humans have been sitting 600,000 years next to an open fire and to seek warmth, safety, but also company and collectivity.
Yes, sociality, coherence.
Yes, and also language.
Absolutely.
Language did not develop when hunting because you couldn't talk there. You were by yourself. But in the evenings, surely there was a need to somehow communicate.
Yeah, and like being under a tree, the gentle breeze that happens, that kind of Venturi effect, it speeds up when it goes beneath the tree and then you hear the rustling of leaves. Fire is so alive. It talks to you, it crackles.
Yes.
And it also makes this constantly shifting light on the face, this glow, this real incandescence, which is much different.
There's something really inspiring about the movements of the flames. I could, at our summer place, I'm sitting at the end of the table in Hanneda's father's old chair, and I can see at the same time through a glass door the water, the lake, and then the fire side by side, and that is utterly satisfying.
These simple, pure, primal experiences are so regenerating, and they're simple.
Some
And it seems like we're trying to recreate these with all these sort of convoluted digital means, and they're so... The thing about fire and water, the elements, air, earth, is they're irreducible. Fire is something irreducible. You can't explain what it is. The same with water. And they're so multisensory that it's there's smell, there's taste, there's the constant movement and the shifting. I mean, fire, how do you even...
There is a nice book, History of Fire, by a writer whose name is Pyre. Interestingly.
Yeah, that's easy to remember. Well, this deeper kind of level of being from which we access the best designs, art, artistic works of lasting value. You did it. You quoted the other day Adrian Stokes, who said, "In a way, all art originates in the body."
Well, yes. Well, one must remember the time he wrote that. It's a bit blunt as an argument, but I don't think he meant this exactly body as a physical thing, but the bodily capacities, the senses.
But we also know that the body is not just a physical thing.
No, it's not, absolutely.
I mean, the body is a process among other processes.
Well, just to give an example, we have more bacterial life in our stomach than what is the argument or the finding?
Well, it's another brain. It's the enteric nervous system.
Yes, that's what the...
It's the enteric nervous system.
Yes, exactly. My problem has become forgetfulness.
Well, I'm forgetful, and you're 88. I can't imagine. When I'm 80, I don't even know if I'll make it to 88 at this rate. But I wanted to go back to Adrian Stokes for a minute, because he has this argument. He distinguished the carver and the modeler. And the carver, the stone speaks and dictates in a way what it wants to be. And so,
yes, but it's also a carving is taking away.
Yes.
Whereas modeling is adding.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me, maybe it's a blunt comparison, but what we were talking about, poetic imagination compared to the intellectualization. That the modeler conceives of something and imposes it on to so-called neutral space. Because if you're imposing, it's not responsive to what the ground is actually saying. Yeah. Compared to the carver, who the ground is determining, is a collaboration between the carver and the material itself. It sort of reminds me of drawing, like the liberation the students felt when they had charcoal in their hand that was messing up their hand, and it was sloppy, and there was no way you can be neat with charcoal.
Yes. Well, Kain Tapper, the sculptor, who's this wall piece and the Madonna by him, a very fine sculptor who was one of my closest friends. For him, working was always messy. It was all a mess, and he did not aim at sharpness or perfection at all. when normally in museums there is a sign, do not touch.
Yes, always.
He wanted people to touch his objects. And he felt that the more there is touch there, the more life is on the surface.
Yeah, the more energy is transferred to the object.
Yes, that's right.
In this talismanic,
yes,
mythic way.
Yes, and contact between the human world. Yes. He was a country boy. He had, they were 4 brothers in central Finland, children of boys of a farmer. And each one of them became a notable figure in Finnish culture.
Wow. Well, how would you be different if you didn't grow up on a farm but in the city?
Well, I think increasingly that my most significant characteristics always derive from my youth. For instance, the fact that I was left alone. There were not even any toys, so you had to seek your source of interest from nature and from the animals of the house, and then watching adults work. There were hardly any instructions to stay away from anything. For instance, there was a small river going through my grandfather's farm. I could not swim. Nobody taught me to swim because the farmers did not swim themselves. But I was not prevented from spending my days by the river. And being by the river and looking at the underwater life was so important for me. But in today's world, a child would definitely not be permitted to be by the river.
I grew up the same way. I grew up in the woods. I spent all day in the woods. There were still woods around. Yeah. And by the time I made it to late elementary school, the woods was cut down and a jungle gym was put into place, like a jungle gym, and I never went back there because it was sad. It was a loss.
Yes. And my grandfather gave me my first adult knife when I was 5. I still have scars in my fingers, but I learned to use the knife.
Would you recommend that?
Well, I would not recommend it in the urban situation because to have a confidence on your young child that he doesn't do anything really harmful, you need the educational environment of the farm.
Yes.
The urban environment does not teach safe behavior.
Yeah, and it's frankly dangerous for young kids. So growing up in urban environments, it's not possible. Well, there's limited possibility to be truly free in the way that you grew up.
Yes. I would say that, in a way, good education takes away or weakens the intellectual, urbanized, higher layers and reveals the students' earlier experiences. I think that should happen.
Absolutely.
But to close the conversation about childhood, I very often go back to my childhood. Just a moment remembering something, and it always feels very, very good.
Mm. Well, all of your writings, materiality, authenticity, sincerity, all of those things cannot be manufactured, no matter how hard you try.
Mm.
They came from a real physical place.
Yes, life experience. Yes. Well, in architects' work and education, it is essential to get away from the focusing on form as a physical thing. You need to get into what the form is, what it is, and what and the consequence of what it is.
Well, form is both, in English at least, which comes straight from the Greek, is both a noun and a verb. And I think that we tend to forget the verbal.
That's right.
The verbal identity,
yes,
and characteristic of
yes,
form.
yes.
And so form is so misunderstood. And it's usually the first thing that's in this world of concept. Form and concept go together as if they're somehow equal or somehow like self-identical with each other. The concept is the form and vice versa, which is so alien to what form actually is in nature.
Yes. Well, I suggested have less than a year ago to the Virkala Foundation that they should make another symposium. You probably know the symposium on neuroscience and on empathy.
Well, I came here. The last time I was in Finland was with you at that symposium.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they said, what subject would I suggest? I suggested take all the arts, at least 10 of the arts, and the subject would be form in each one of the arts. And the first part, 5 arts, was in the spring, and it was just fantastic.
Wow.
All the participants, we had the best artists of each, art to tell about what it form is personally to them.
Did you make a volume on that? Did you create another book?
Well, we will because we have the second part in September.
Well, that reminds me of a quote which I tend to circle around similar quotes, but James Gibson, the ecological psychologist, said that the problem in architectural education is architects learn form as painters learn form.
Mm.
But form
yes.
for architects is about locomotion.
Yes.
It's about movement.
Yes. Well,
they're two different things.
Yes, that's right. Well, there will be an English language translation of the essays.
No, I'm interested in that. That sounds, and I want to think and write more about form because it's so very misunderstood.
Yes.
So how do you arrive at form in architecture? Where does form come from in a verbal sense?
Well, I don't think of form in architecture. I think it's. I think in other terms. Well, movement is certainly one, and in architecture, form is too static.
Yes.
Too static.
Too static. So it really should be about movement, materiality.
Yes.
Light.
Yes, movement in the practical sense of the person moving or things moving, but then also the suggested movement of perception.
Yeah, which Gibson would call affordances, really, the invitations to behave in certain ways.
Yes, yes.
At Paimio Sanatorium, they showed all the drawings of, that Aino and Alto and Alvar did when they were in their late 20s. All those hopeful drawings they did. And one showed the air movement from the patient's point of view.
Yes.
So it was a diagram of air movement. Yes. So speaking of movement,
yes,
talking to our mutual friend Petri Berntsen, we tend to forget about the air.
Yes. Yes. Well, I was shocked when he mentioned the subject of his doctoral work. How come that phenomenological thinking has so long surpassed the primary thing?
Well, I don't know of another phenomenologist besides Bachelard who even talked about the air or the earth as an element,
yes.
Or fire as an element.
Yes.
And given our deep fascination with these elements and their irreducibility.
Yes, that probably suggests that even phenomenologists are so much caught in the intellectual, verbalized world to begin to think of breathing and breath. It's going beyond, below words.
But it's the basis of, we could say, philosophy itself. I mean, pneuma, the Greek word for breath, is spirit. It's at the foundation of culture. It's a most basic interaction of our life. Either we breathe or we're dead. So
yes.
It is like the very definition of vitality.
That's right. Did you have good conversation with him?
Yes.
He's so full of energy.
Yes, and so passionate.
Yes.
And we have many things in common, like Zen meditation and love for Bachelard, which you also share.
Yes.
When did you first encounter Bachelard?
In 1978, I visited Cranbrook Academy for the first time, and Daniel Libeskind took me to the bookshop of Cranbrook Academy and pointed out the book to me. I didn't know. It was new then.
Poetics of Space.
Yes. This you must read. And I purchased the copy, and I have read it so many times through now.
I've read it so many times, and each time I discover not one, but many
new things
and new images and poetic images.
Yes,
and they all come to life in a new way, and I can't believe that I didn't see that the first time.
Yes.
I think we just keep renewing ourselves.
Hope so.
Like I know so much more now than I used to, but I don't know. Because, every time you remember your childhood slightly changes. That's
yes,
also not a static
yes, of course.
photograph.
One of my regrets is that I didn't go to meet Bachelor in Paris. He had died, of course, already when I designed. I was working on the Finnish Institute opposite the Sorbonne, where he taught.
I remember you telling me that, and I was in Paris and staying in that arrondissement close to the Sorbonne, and I went to your wonderful cultural center. It's super alive, so carefully detailed.
Well, that was probably almost the last time that the Ministry of Education of Finnish government permitted an architect to do everything, every single door handle, light source, everything, because I had a good friend, a tough guy at the Ministry of Education who was in charge of international operations, and he trusted me 100%.
Well, it shows. It's a total work of art. Would you say there's qualities that distinguish Finnish architecture from other architecture?
Sorry?
Would you say there's certain qualities that distinguish Finnish architecture from other architecture?
Well, one would be an interest in the detail, and to extend the notion of architecture into objects, like I myself have always designed objects to my buildings. But perhaps also simplicity, but not simplicity as an intellectualized, formalistic attitude, but as a existential simplicity. Those would be, and then nature, a respect for nature, which doesn't show in the formal language perhaps at all, but in the kind of respect for things, respect for materials, for instance.
I find courtesy to be a
courtesy
distinguishing.
Yes, that's a very important thing. You are right. And much of the celebrated new architecture is the opposite. For instance, the work of Rem Koolhaas, I just cannot tolerate it.
Yeah, it's repulsive. It actually repels vulnerability, as you say. It's not designed for the weak in us, the vulnerable, the tenderness. It's designed for this exhausting, heroic, pretentious.
The building committee of the Seattle Library came here to talk with me because Stephen was one of their candidates, and they wanted to hear from me how it was to work with Stephen. And when they were leaving, I heard that one of the candidates for the designer was Rem Koolhaas. And I went to the chairman and said, if you choose him as the architect, you will have a celebrated building but a bad library. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it's amazing the first time you go in, but the people who work there despise it. It's despised by people who have to...
relationship between the reader and the book. And I, as Louis Kahn so many times wrote, that's the primary relationship in a library.
Which Alvar Aalto mastered.
Yes, but even the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris,
yes,
although
absolutely.
It's such a huge space, it still focuses on that relationship.
Well, you've also said that you would never want anybody to live in your personal statement, but I think you're the exception to that, unfortunately. I mean, the Seattle Library is a personal statement.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with place. It has nothing to do with the reader experience or the
That's
people
right.
who work there.
Yes, absolutely. I write increasingly about existential experience, and because I feel very strongly that architecture is fundamentally an existential experience. We do not look at architecture, we don't even touch architecture, we confront it with our own sense of existence. So it's the fusion of two existences, the observers and architecture, they fuse. I think this fused existential experience is an important aspect of how we experience architecture and how architecture addresses us and changes our both behavior and experience, feeling. It enters our existential sphere, which is of course something else than just merely looking at something.
When you reflect on your childhood, what images come to mind? Speaking of existence.
Well, the court between the sauna, the cow house, pigsty, and the house, and then the storage house. That was very important for me because and it somehow I embodied that feeling of that only partly enclosed space, but still enough to define so that I could appreciate it. And then I especially this was the house, this was the sauna, smaller than this was the cow, how you call it for cows. And
the barn?
No, where cows and animals were. And at any rate, here I've always felt that the veranda, which was axially in relation to this space, this was the first space I experienced and understood. I felt that there was a meaningful, something was communicated by that positioning.
So in this drawing, there's the long rectangle to the right and a smaller rectangle to the left, and you're in the center between these two. Like, so you're kind of, it's sort of a compression.
It's a compression, almost like to mark the entry. I don't know how much that was meaningful in a intellectual manner, but this just happened to be a place where I understood that. Well, I understood that there is meaning in space.
Yes.
The first time.
And when did that take place? How old were you?
Before I went to school, 6 years probably.
And that veranda, so was it a veranda that, was it like a porch that you sit on with chairs?
No, not really, because of Finnish climate. It was a climatic the space with stairs, and we never sat there.
But it still was a form of welcome and invitation.
Yes, but also there was some authority. Authority.
Yes.
I'm watching you who are coming.
Yes. Well, that's good feng shui.
Sorry?
The in Chinese feng shui.
Yes.
This is an excellent feng shui.
Yes.
Directionality.
Yes.
Where the door has a commanding view, but
Yes.
it's also protected because it needs to be defended. It's
Yes.
defensible space
Yes.
as well.
Yes. Yes.
But then there's this openness. So it's this compression, but then there's this open courtyard. What took place in the courtyard?
Well, for instance, my aunt's wedding was organized there. Whenever my grandfather had some friends come, and they usually drank vodka, they didn't drink indoors. They were sitting here.
Having a good time. So
having
it's
a good time.
very conviviality.
Yes.
The space. Well, thank you so much, Juhani. Thank you for listening to Situated. Tune in next time for more conversations exploring how our surroundings shape us.